When you've got millions of eyes on you, you want to look your best. It's why your mum gets all of those tennis sessions with your dad's business partners late at night. So it's natural that wrestlers spend a hell of a lot of time in the gym. You gotta be strong, you gotta have stamina, and sometimes apparently you gotta stab needles into your ass and swell up more than a balloon animal made of meat. Yeah, that last one hints at the very shady side of this business, the use of steroids. It's been long speculated that some wrestlers just seemed a bit too vascular and ripped to have gotten that bod through simply working out, and as a result, steroids have been labelled as the root cause. Now, in most cases, we're not allowed to call out those who've been at the juice bar because it's all just allegations. However, the wrestlers on this list admitted to their love affair with sweet lady Ronda Roids, so let's have a gander at those grossly inflated gargantuans. With this in mind, I'm Jules for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 wrestlers who admitted their physiques were drug-enhanced bullshit. Number 10. Hercules Hernandez. Rey Hernandez had an interesting journey in his formative years in professional wrestling. While he was really just known as a muscle guy at the peak of his popularity in the WWF, he was considered something of a total package and a prodigy earlier on. He wasn't just getting by on his physique, he was a solid promo cutter and such a good athletic performer. Still, he was Hercules, so his body was pretty much his gimmick, and he took it to the extreme. So much so that when he was in Mid-South Wrestling in 1984, he actually bragged about his steroid use during promos. Yes, really. He would point at his bicep and scream how much Dianabol it took a day to get it that big. Now, at that point in the 80s, steroids weren't anything close to a hot button issue yet, so there was no real controversy, but now, oh boy. Number 9. Dynamite Kid. Dynamite Kid was one of the most physically gifted performers in wrestling history. A brilliant high flyer and technical wrestler, he was hugely influential in a number of ways. When Dynamite Kid first left England for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling in Canada, he was the embodiment of a skinny teenager. A great athlete, of course, but absent of the protection of England's weight classes, he looked incredibly tiny. He quickly wowed crowds and got over anyway, but it wasn't long before he started getting steroids from an athletic commission doctor, as revealed in his book, Pure Dynamite. Within a few years, he looked like he was a completely different human being. He gained an absurd amount of muscle that just didn't look right on his body. That much added unnatural weight is stress on your body, and when you throw in a reckless in-ring style, it takes a tremendous toll, as it did for Dynamite. He got off the steroids due to a heart condition, but that was after he had already destroyed his back, eventually costing him the use of his legs. Number 8. Chris Benoit. As crazy as it sounds, it was not uncommon to see internet discussions where Chris Benoit fans would argue that he was clean and that his physique was attainable without chemical help. And I just want to say, have you seen how he looked, especially in the later part of his career? That is not a physique that can be obtained through diet and exercise alone. Everyone figured that he was a big steroid abuser, but we just didn't know how big until his death. After his passing, it came out that Benoit was known to the US Drug Enforcement Administration as somebody who bought unusually large quantities of steroids from a number of suppliers under investigation. Now, you've got to think about that for a second. He wasn't a dealer, he was a user, but he was such a big user that he was on the radar of the DEA as a person of interest. That is mind-boggling and tragic. Number 7. Superstar Billy Graham. In many ways, Superstar Billy Graham was something of a pioneer when it came to steroid use in professional wrestling. While there had been other steroid users before him, Graham was the first big star who was defined by them. Within 3 years of booting up as Pat Patterson's tag partner, he was headlining in the AWA, the number 2 drawing and paying territory in the country at that time. A few years after that, he was the first heel to get an extended run with the biggest money spot in the business as WWF champion. And he was entirely jacked to the nines this entire time. After a long battle with depression, he returned to the scene but was never really the same. He eventually became something of an anti-steroid advocate, as the years of abuse had left him with a condition called avascular necrosis that caused severe degeneration of his hip and ankle bones. With Graham considered to be the biggest steroid pioneer in wrestling, it seemed like the inevitability that others would suffer from the same condition, but if anyone else did, they never made waves about it. Number 6. The Ultimate Warrior. He was charismatic, sure, but with the attitude he had and a lack of desire to improve as a performer, there had to be something that Vince saw in the flowing-maned madman. What could it have been? Oh yeah, it was the fact that he was a raging zeppelin of roids. Warrior was recruited into wrestling because he looked like a bodybuilder and got his push because he didn't talk like one. Weirdly enough though, people don't like talking about his use of steroids after his death, even though he testified about his use of them during the McMahon trial. After he retired, Warrior never hid his steroid use at all, even arguing proving their benefits if used, air quotes, responsibly. During his career, his nickname in the business was the Anabolic Warrior, and he even failed every single drug test he took during the period in 1992, where he shrunk to the point that most people thought that he was clean. Number 5. Ken Shamrock. Speculation about Ken Shamrock's steroid abuse went back long before he returned to pro wrestling. Even in the UFC, nobody else looked like him. He was huge, cut like a superhero out of a comic book, and to go with those looks, he had legitimate skills. Throw in his existing pro wrestling experience, and it made all the sense in the world for the WWE to go after him when the money in MMA evaporated. Shamrock went back to MMA after a neck injury ended his WWE career, which doesn't sound like the smartest move. Oh, I'm injured. Better fight more. He won just 5 of his 15 post-WWF fights, with his failed drug test coming after one of the wins. His adoptive brother and former training partner Frank believes that having to get off the steroids, or at least take much lower doses to pass Athletic Commission testing, sapped too much of his confidence, which resulted in the losses. Number 4. The Warlord. One of the most thickly muscled wrestlers of the late 80s and early 90s, the Warlord was considered to be something of a neon sign of a wrestler whose primary skill was shooting steroids. He had very little mobility and flexibility, as if he was far too big for his own good. And while he wasn't completely untalented, he needed a special opponent with strong chemistry to do anything especially interesting. The worst thing that ever happened to him, though, was that he was made into a singles wrestler. Teaming with the Barbarian as the Powers of Pain, he could be hidden, as the Barbarian was a great athlete who turned into an incredibly gifted and underrated wrestler. In this dynamic, the Barbarian could carry the action and let Warlord pick his spots to show off his power. In singles action, though, he was nothing but an inflated lumberfoot, something which he testified as during Vince McMahon's criminal trial. Number 3. Davey Boy Smith. A teenager who idolized his cousin Dynamite Kid, DBS followed in his footsteps as a wrestler, even training with Ted Betley as his idol had done so. Like Dynamite, Davey became a star on TV back home in the UK, and it led him to joining his cousin in Calgary. After a quick juice boost, he ballooned out, and it's easy to see when he did this, looking at photos. He eventually did shed some of his weight and got some of his more athleticism back late in his career, but the steroids had already taken their toll. After his death in 2002, a medical examiner declared long-term steroid abuse as a contributing factor in his fatal heart attack. Number 2. Mr. Kennedy. When the Benoit tragedy took over world news in 2007, Mr. Kennedy was one of the few active WWE stars to speak publicly about all of the negative attention the company was getting in the light of the quantity of steroids found in Chris Benoit's home. He did interviews and wrote a blog post where he claimed that he'd used steroids in the past as an independent wrestler, but how his opportunity in the WWE had cleaned him up. Weeks later, the district attorney's office in Albany, New York, made available the customer list of a recently raided pharmacy. And whose name was on there, making him a bit of a fibber about the whole cleaning up things? Mr. Kennedy! And number 1, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is an amazing talent. He's not the most gifted technical wrestler by any stretch of the imagination, but he's an all-time great talker and amongst the most charismatic men ever to walk the planet. But would he have made it without the steroids, though? The skinny kid who was trained by Hiro Matsuda, Pat Patterson, and others still looked like an athlete. If that guy developed the swagger, the speaking skills, and the bronze tan, would superstardom follow? Possibly, but we'll never know. What we do know is how he actually got to the limelight. Hogan admitted he'd boosted his career with the juicing during Vince McMahon's steroid trial, becoming one of the most infamous moments of that entire ordeal.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe below, and if you're looking for more content like this, then try a few things that are floating about around my ears. It might be fun. I can't promise it though, but it might be.